Welcome to the Deconstructionist Deep Dive.
The podcast that doesn't just accept the story.
We break it. We are the scalpel, ready to apply rigorous logic.
We examine the pieces, looking at the narratives that shape our perception of reality.
And expose the machinery inside.
Let's dive in. What if the most dangerous form of control isn't being told what to think, but being flattered into believing you're thinking for yourself?
That opening question is, well, it's really the key to today's mission, isn't it? We are undertaking a deep, critical analysis of what we're calling the Rogan persuasion matrix. We're tracing the rhetorical, the philosophical, and, the systemic structures that allow one massive media entity to generate influence by, relentlessly fueling institutional distrust.
Yeah, that's the core of it.
Our goal today is to basically give you the operational manual. How does this machinery work? How does it manufacture this figure of the anti-authority authority?
And this deep dive is crucial because the system we're examining, it's incredibly sophisticated. It actually weaponizes the very skepticism we often encourage right here on this show.
That's the ironic part.
It is. Our focus today is dissecting how that act of intellectual rebellion, that feeling of thinking for yourself, gets centralized, curated, and ultimately, let's be honest, monetized.
Right. Allowing one voice to sort of become the benchmark for what independent thought even sounds like. Okay, let's unpack this foundational idea first. Our research shows pretty clearly that the JRE, it operates way beyond just being a popular show, right?
No, absolutely. It's not just entertainment.
It functions as a highly persuasive ecosystem, a whole structured environment designed to shape how the audience perceives truth.
And the core mechanism, the engine driving it all, is this construction of the host as the ultimate paradoxical figure, the anti-authority authority.
That phrase itself, it's a contradiction in terms.
It is. It's a cognitive paradox. And frankly, it's brilliant marketing. If you, the listener, feel disillusioned by established institutions, the usual suspects, mainstream media, scientific bodies, government.
Which a lot of people do.
Exactly. The system flatters you. It validates that feeling. It tells you that this disillusionment, this skepticism, is actually proof that you're an independent, sharp thinker. You're one of the smart ones who sees through it.
But here's the twist, the real sleight of hand. In the very act of rejecting those established authorities, the audience is guided, almost seamlessly, directly into a new, centralized, and arguably exponentially more powerful form of influence.
You trade one authority for another.
You trade the authority of, say, the New York Times or the CDC for the authority of the platform, the authority of the host.
Yes. And the host earns this colossal credibility precisely because he rejects the established order. Because he adopts this whole aesthetic of the humble truth seeker, the guy just asking questions.
So skepticism of the outside world becomes the very foundation for, almost dogmatic acceptance of the perspective presented inside the show's universe.
It's a highly effective way to centralize influence while maintaining the appearance, the feeling of decentralization and independent thought.
But this system, it needs the conflict to survive, doesn't it? If, hypothetically, trust in institutions were suddenly restored tomorrow.
The whole edifice would crumble. There'd be no narrative tension.
Exactly. So we have to look at the strategic incentive architecture. What's the business model? How is the system actually, strategically incentivized to keep the pot boiling, to maintain that distrust?
Well, the sources point to a pretty clear equation here. The brand equity resertion, the value of the JRE brand itself, seems to be inversely correlated with trust in mainstream institutions. Meaning the less people trust the WHO or CNN or the government, the more valuable the JRE brand becomes as the alternative. Think about it. If those institutions were viewed as completely honest and transparent...
Where's the drama? Where's the rogue truth seeker narrative?
Exactly. There'd be no fight. No taboo topics left to bravely discuss if everyone trusted the mainstream sources.
So the system, for its own survival, requires the constant perpetuation of institutional distrust. It thrives in an environment where the world feels corrupt, opaque, like everyone's hiding the real story.
Which, in turn, incentivizes constant questioning. But maybe not always questioning for the sake of clarity.
But questioning for the sake of maintaining doubt, keeping that friction alive.
Precisely. That doubt is the product, in a way.
And this framework helps us understand what might otherwise look like random ideological shifts, right? The political alignments we see.
Like supporting certain political figures or movements.
Yeah, the sources identify those not just as personal ideological choices, but maybe as calculated network expansions, like strategic moves within this anti-establishment influence economy.
It's essentially a marketing strategy. You target demographics already primed for institutional distrust. So by aligning with figures like, say, Donald Trump or Robert F. Kennedy Jr., figures often framed as anti-establishment icons themselves.
Regardless of their actual policies sometimes.
Right, regardless of the specifics, the platform expands its reach deeper into that anti-system demographic. It's about synergy within that influence economy, market share, essentially.
But the final piece of this architecture you mentioned, it's maybe the most insidious, what the sources call dependency engineering.
This is crucial. It's the intentional positioning of the show, the platform, as the definitive primary source for the real conversation, the only place you can hear what's really going on.
So if you already believe the truth is being hidden everywhere else,
You naturally develop a reliance, a dependency on the one place that claims to discuss the taboo subjects, the place where both sides are supposedly really heard, unfiltered.
so you're actively fostering reliance on this single curated information flow. The underlying message becomes, if you want the real truth, the stuff they don't want you to hear, you have to enter the Roganverse.
Yes. And that just reinforces the host's status as that definitive anti-authority authority. It's a feedback loop. The more the listener distrusts the outside world, the more dependent they become on the system that validates and feeds that distrust.
Okay, so if this ecosystem positions itself as the ultimate platform for truth and, importantly, skepticism.
Then it needs to be held to the highest standards itself.
Exactly. We have to apply that same rigorous intellectual scrutiny to it. And when we do that, the first and maybe the most pervasive mechanism we identify is what the sources call cafeteria skepticism.
This is such a crucial concept.
Yeah.
And it goes beyond just simple confirmation bias.
Okay, explain that distinction. Because if the host is skeptical of the mainstream, isn't that just good critical thinking? How is it different from standard confirmation bias, where people just, look for facts that support what they already believe?
That's a fair question. Confirmation bias is often more passive. You filter information as it comes in. Cafeteria skepticism is more active and rhetorical. It's about where you apply the scrutiny, meaning intense skepticism demands for empirical proof, pointing out conflicts of interest, demanding double-blind studies. All that rigor is directed only toward one side.
Towards the mainstream institutions, big pharma, established media, government research.
Exactly. The questions are sharp. They're designed to expose flaws, demand impossible levels of certainty. But
What happens when the conversation shifts? When it turns to a claim that aligns with the anti-establishment narrative?
the burden of proof just dramatically lowers, or it evaporates entirely. If a claim supports the narrative of institutional failure, maybe an unproven alternative remedy, or a conspiracy theory about, say, election fraud,
That same level of rigorous scrutiny is suddenly absent.
it's minimized or completely missing. You get to choose, like picking items in a cafeteria line, which ideas you subject to intense critical analysis, and which ones you just sort of accept onto your tray without question.
So it's the performance of critical thinking. It looks like skepticism, but it's applied selectively, without the actual intellectual cost of applying it universally.
Precisely. And often, this selective approach is triggered or amplified by what we call anecdotal weaponization.
Okay, weaponizing anecdotes, personal stories.
This is the substitution mechanism. Because data, let's face it, is often complex, it's cold, it doesn't resonate emotionally. So personal experience, the anecdote gets substituted for broader, epidemiological, or generalizable evidence.
It bypasses scientific methodology entirely.
Completely. The sources give a really potent example, using a personal COVID-19 recovery story.
Right, like I took ivermectin, or I just used vitamins and I was fine in 3 days, that kind of thing.
Exactly. That personal account, I took this unproven thing and I recovered, delivered by a trusted voice, feels deeply relatable. It's inherently more compelling, more memorable than a dry discussion of population-level morbidity rates or vaccine efficacy data.
Our brains aren't really wired for statistics, are they? We're wired for stories.
And that's exactly why it works so well. A single, emotionally resonant story, especially when shared by that anti-authority figure, carries far more persuasive weight for many in the audience than dozens of complex, peer-reviewed studies.
So it replaces the hard work of science.
With a simple, relatable success story. The dangerous consequence is that you, the listener, might mistake personal luck or circumstance, or maybe just a mild case of illness, for proof of universal effectiveness.
Okay, so if the anecdote weaponizes personal experience, then the next flaw, speculative leapfrogging, weaponizes academic uncertainty. This is where it gets really interesting, especially with things like, ancient history discussions.
Oh, this is a beautiful rhetorical technique. It's quite elegant in a way.
How does it work?
The technique involves using legitimate, acknowledged anomalies, real historical findings where experts genuinely disagree, or where the facts challenge old theories.
Things scientists are actually debating.
Right. Real points of uncertainty. And using those legitimate questions as a springboard to justify expansive, often completely evidence-free claims.
Like the classic example, the Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. It's a genuinely fascinating Neolithic site, right? Really old, complex.
Absolutely. And it genuinely challenges previous timelines for when humans started building large, complex structures. There's real academic debate there about its purpose, construction, dating.
Okay, legitimate scientific uncertainty.
But that legitimate doubt becomes the launch pad. It's used to leapfrog into massive, unsupported claims.
Right.
Ancient aliens, pyramid power plants, advanced lost civilizations with high technology 10,000 years ago.
So the strategy isn't really to prove the pyramid power plants exist?
Not necessarily. The immediate goal is often just to sow seeds of absolute doubt about established knowledge, to create a feeling that they, the experts, have got everything wrong.
So by successfully connecting doubt about, say, the accepted timeline of early civilization,
they fuel this immediate, almost corrosive distrust in present-day knowledge systems. The subtle argument becomes, look, if the experts were fundamentally wrong about something as basic as when civilization started, how on earth can you possibly trust them on something really complex, like climate modeling or vaccine safety or economic policy?
it's using a crack in the foundation of historical understanding to suggest the whole building of modern knowledge is about to collapse.
Exactly. The goal is total epistemic collapse for the mainstream narrative, which then, conveniently, makes the system that champions these anomalies the only place left where you can supposedly find the real truth.
Yeah.
Hashtag #3. The PSYOPS and narrative machinery. Okay, so we've looked at the logical flaws, the cracks in the reasoning. Now we need to shift gears and look at the engine of mass influence itself, the narrative machinery. This is where the PSYOPS, the psychological operations, really come into play. This is how the identity is constructed, the identity that keeps the audience hooked.
And central to this whole operation is the active construction of an us versus them dichotomy, right?
Right.
Built almost entirely on emotional proof and tribalism.
Absolutely critical. Us, we're the free-thinking rebels, the ones who are awake, the independent minds, the ones asking the hard questions, maybe the ones who, lift weights and optimize our health.
Well, right. And them?
Them is the monolith. The corrupt media, the deep state, big pharma, the narrative pushers, the globalists, the elites. It's a long list, but it's always vaguely defined and inherently malicious.
This tribal language, it's not just flavor, is it? It's structurally essential.
Oh, completely. It gives listeners a clear identity. It provides a feeling of, frankly, moral superiority. You're not just passively consuming media. You're part of something important, a counter-movement. And it creates an immediate, powerful sense of belonging.
You're not just a listener. You're an initiated member of this intellectual rebellion. You're in the club.
Exactly. And this tribalism gets solidified, often, through what the sources call the power of a synecdoche.
Synecdoche. Okay, remind us that's where a small part is used to represent the entire whole, right?
Precisely. And the sources cite a specific, often repeated example. The allegation about CNN altering the host's appearance, the green face incident related to ivermectin discussion.
Right, I remember that controversy.
Now, regardless of the specific factual details or explanations offered later, that story, that single alleged incident, functions as a perfect synecdoche.
How so?
One alleged visual misrepresentation, a detail that's easily grasped, maybe even humorous or ridiculous depending on how it's framed, gets used to stand in for the entire vast, complex machinery of the mainstream news industry.
So it becomes emotional proof. This one highly memorable, maybe emotionally charged story
solidifies the belief, the feeling, that the entire mainstream media is deceptive. All of it, all the time. The alleged failure or dishonesty of one small part is presented as definitive proof of a systemic, malicious cover-up by the entire opposition narrative.
It's a shortcut to dismissal. You don't need to analyze every article. You just remember the green face.
Exactly. And this whole movement, this tribe, it needs a founding myth, doesn't it? which is supplied by the hero's journey of the host himself.
The biography as narrative weapon.
Totally. The background, blue-collar roots, martial arts disciplines, stand-up comedy, challenging norms. It's all framed as this ultimate narrative battle. The authentic, uncorrupted voice fighting against the corrupt establishment, the academic suits, the media elite.
He becomes the anti-intellectual intellectual, the everyman who somehow achieved enlightenment or gnosis, as you mentioned earlier, without needing a fancy degree or towing the institutional line.
He's relatable, but also aspirational in his perceived rebellion.
But this very powerful narrative, it creates enormous friction when you hold it up against reality, which brings us to what the sources identify as the core contradictions, the cognitive dissonance required for this whole system to actually function day to day.
Yeah, we found 3 really massive contradictions bubbling up from the source material. Number 1, and maybe the most obvious, the claim of personal humility.
The constant refrain of, I'm just a dummy asking questions, I don't know anything, that whole aesthetic.
Versus the objective reality of operating a global media empire. An empire that influences tens of millions of people, commands huge audiences, and signs 9-figure distribution deals.
Right. You simply cannot operate one of the most powerful and lucrative influence channels on the entire planet and still genuinely, credibly claim to be just some guy. The power structure is immense.
But the aesthetic has to remain humble. That just asking questions vibe is crucial for maintaining that anti-authority persona. It masks the actual power being wielded.
Okay, contradiction number 1. Humility claim versus empire reality. What's number 2?
Number 2 is this inherent tension between the relentless advocacy for health sovereignty.
The idea that the individual should have absolute control over all their own medical decisions, free from government interference.
Right, that extreme individual liberty stance. But simultaneously, the system often promotes very specific policies. The source material used an acronym, MAHA.
MAHA. What does that stand for in this context?
It seems to stand for something like mandating authority accountability for health assurance. Basically, specific health mandates or sweeping system reforms.
So things that would actually require significant state intervention or top-down authority to implement.
Exactly. You can't logically champion absolute personal freedom from government intervention with one breath and then demand the state enforce massive top-down policy changes, like dismantling specific health agencies or mandating certain standards or intervening in medical practice with the next.
It sounds like freedom for me, but mandates for the system I don't like.
That's a good way to put it. It's a fundamental contradiction in the ideology being presented.
And the third contradiction?
The third one is positioning the host, and by extension the audience, as having successfully escaped the matrix.
Right, broken free from the mainstream manipulation.
While actively and very successfully building a more entertaining, more comprehensive, and certainly more profitable alternative matrix.
So the audience achieves this supposed intellectual liberation only to immediately migrate their attention and, crucially, their engagement, their data, eventually their consumption habits.
To a new, arguably more flattering, more personalized center of gravity. You reject the old, flawed system, only to buy into, or at least tune into, the new, highly curated, commercially driven system. The Roganverse itself becomes the new matrix. #TagShan, philosophical and ideological cross-reference. Now, to really get under the hood of why this persuasion matrix is so incredibly compelling, so sticky for so many people, we need to go deeper than just media analysis or logical fallacies. We need to look at the philosophical scaffolding.
The underlying ideas that make it resonate on a deeper level.
Exactly. Let's start with that core narrative we just discussed. Escape the matrix to find the real truth.
That feeling of having access to secret knowledge, of being one of the few who are truly awake while the masses are asleep or deceived.
We can connect this narrative almost directly to the ancient philosophy of Gnosticism.
Gnosticism. Okay, refresh our memory on the basics.
In a nutshell, Gnosticism views the entire material world, the reality we perceive, as fundamentally flawed, maybe even evil. It's seen as a corrupt prison, created and ruled by an incompetent or perhaps malevolent lesser deity, often called the demiurge.
So the everyday world is the trap.
Right. And true enlightenment, true salvation, which they called gnosis, meaning knowledge is reserved only for a select, aware few. Those who possess this secret knowledge needed to recognize the prison walls and ultimately escape the material illusion.
So in this modern context, the corrupt media, the deep state, big pharma, They become the modern-day demiurge, the forces trapping the masses in a false reality.
That's the parallel.
Yeah.
And the listener who tunes into the alternative source, who gets the real story, they feel like they've achieved gnosis, they've accessed the secret knowledge, they're breaking free.
You can see why that's incredibly flattering to the ego. It provides immense psychological comfort.
Absolutely. You're not just confused or disagreeing with the consensus. You're one of the enlightened rebels who found the key to unlock the hidden truth. But look at the philosophical rebuke to this.
What's the counter-argument?
Well, take Stoicism, for example. Stoicism argues that virtue, the good life, isn't achieved by escaping the world, but through pragmatic engagement with it, facing reality, accepting what you can't control, and working virtuously to fix the problems within the system.
And you also mentioned anarchist social theory in the outline. How does that contrast?
Anarchist thought, particularly social anarchism, would argue that true liberation, real freedom, can never be purely individualistic. It has to be collective. It requires fundamental societal change, dismantling oppressive structures together, not just an individual retreating into a sort of commercialized counterculture bubble.
So the Gnostic escape in this view is inherently individualistic and maybe even passive when it comes to actually changing the world.
Yes, it focuses on individual enlightenment rather than collective action or systemic reform. And this intense emphasis on the individual, on radical individualism, it's not accidental. It functions as a very effective ideological control mechanism. We call this hyper-individualism as control.
How so?
The system constantly champions personal choice as the ultimate good. Everything comes down to your individual decisions.
It sounds very much like a co-option of neoliberal ideology.
It's textbook. It takes complex systemic problems, things like public health crises, environmental issues, economic inequality, and reframes them almost entirely as matters of individual consumer choice and personal responsibility.
So if you get sick, or you're struggling financially, or you're anxious about the future, the narrative implicitly asks, did you buy the right supplements? Did you optimize your diet correctly? Did you hustle hard enough? Did you make the right choices?
Precisely. Which stands in stark contrast to more collectivist philosophies, like the African concept of Ubuntu, the idea that I am because we are, that our humanity and well-being are fundamentally interdependent.
And when every problem is framed as an individual failure of optimization.
The wider system, government inaction, corporate pollution, economic structures, lack of social safety nets is conveniently absolved of accountability. It's all on you.
The philosopher Byung-Chul Han talks about this, doesn't he?
He analyzes this brilliantly. Han argues that this kind of hyper-individualism is a key tool of late-stage capitalism. The individual is made entirely responsible for their own success, their own failures, their own optimization. We become these little entrepreneurs of the self.
Constantly working on our personal brand, our health metric.
Right. And this system doesn't need overt external commands like an old totalitarian regime. It relies on internal pressure, the constant pressure to hustle, optimize, perform, self-brand, which actually frees external systems like the state or corporations from needing to manage or genuinely care for the population's well-being.
Wow, so that transforms the audience member, who thinks they're a sovereign thinker, into potentially just a constant self-optimizing laborer, ultimately responsible for navigating systemic failures entirely on their own.
It shifts the burden entirely. And this connects to the final philosophical point, the grift prelude.
The prelude to the grift sounds ominous.
It stems from something we call problematic permanence. The strategy here is to use enduring, legitimate, often fascinating, unsolved, ancient mysteries.
Like how exactly the pyramids were built or the full meaning of Stonehenge. Things we genuinely don't have all the answers to.
Exactly. Real deep mysteries. And use the existence of these permanent uncertainties to invalidate entire bodies of functional, useful, modern knowledge.
So the logic is, because there's still some academic debate about the precise construction techniques used for a 12,000-year-old stone pillar in Turkey.
Therefore, we should reject the entire modern scientific consensus on climate change or virology or economics.
That's a huge leap.
It's a massive intellectual jump, but rhetorically, it can be very effective. It taps into that sense of wonder and mystery and weaponizes it against mundane functional knowledge.
What's the counter to that?
The pragmatic counterpoint is simply scientific pragmatism. You measure the truth or usefulness of a knowledge system by its predictive power and its utility. Does it work?
Airplanes fly based on aerodynamic principles, even if we don't know everything about ancient aliens. Modern medicine saves lives, even if we haven't solved every historical enigma.
Exactly. The utility exists, The planes fly, the bridges stand, the vaccines prevent disease, regardless of whether we've fully deciphered every 10,000-year-old mystery.
But the mystery is always going to be sexier than the engineering spreadsheet or the epidemiological data.
And that's the prelude to the grift. By using these profound, enduring historical questions to create a vacuum of distrust around established experts and functional knowledge.
You create an opening.
Exactly. That vacuum is immediately, and often very profitably, filled by alternative gurus, by charismatic figures selling secret knowledge, proprietary supplements, expensive courses, exclusive communities, or fringe theories. The intellectual distrust generated by the ancient mystery is merely the lead-in, the setup, for the profitable commercial transaction that follows.
Okay, let's get tactical now. We've mapped the big picture, the philosophy, the core contradictions. Now let's break down the specific tools the rhetorical deceptions use day in, day out to execute this Rogan persuasion matrix. We identified 10 core tools from the sources right there, and they seem to fall into 3 functional groups.
Yeah, that's right. We can group them by how they function within the system. The first group, tools 1 to 3, are all about establishing epistemic authority. These are the tools that convince the listener that this source, this host, and the guests brought onto the platform are the most reliable, most trustworthy channels for getting at the truth.
Okay, deception number 1. Anecdote as universal proof. We touched on this earlier, but let's nail it down. The logical fallacy is hasty generalization, right? And it's supercharged by the whole influencer industrial complex.
Exactly. The archetype here is like the wise elder's story or maybe the survivor's tale. It's designed to feel authentic, deeply personal, immediately relatable. It completely sidesteps the need for complex data or statistics.
And the consequence for the audience.
It's critical.
Yeah.
It essentially outsources systemic, difficult understanding like how public policy works or how epidemiology functions to a single compelling storyteller. The logic becomes, if the host or this relatable guest experienced X and they seem successful or healthy, then X must be universally true, safe, or effective for everyone. Personal story trumps population data.
Okay. Deception number 2, false binary of information. This is the classic false dichotomy fallacy put to work, creating that stark in-group, out-group dynamic. You mentioned this feels like a cult dynamic applied to mass media.
It really does. The source of power fueling this is often the rise of these large alternative media empires, creating their own information bubbles. And the consequence to the listener, it completely destroys nuance, it flattens the world.
You're given this simple choice, pure us versus corrupt them.
Right. If you acknowledge any complexity, any gray areas, maybe even a single redeeming feature or valid point coming from the mainstream or the establishment,
you risk being branded as one of them. A shill, a sheep, bandwashed.
Exactly. It's designed to blindfold the audience to any middle ground, any possibility of synthesis or measured agreement. It forces a choice between total acceptance of the in-group narrative or total rejection.
And number 3, the one that really makes the authority figure palatable, even while they wield immense influence. Strategic humility. This is the appeal to modesty fallacy, but used as a kind of masked authority. The archetype is the philosopher king, but dressed down in denim and a baseball cap.
This is arguably the most brilliant tool in the kit for retaining that coveted anti-authority status while simultaneously wielding massive global authority. The audience is encouraged to mistake incredibly sophisticated, powerful branding.
The branding of the globe-spanning podcasting mogul who just signed a deal worth hundreds of millions.
For an authentic, humble, just one of the guys, casual personality, I'm just riffing here. I'm probably wrong. I'm just asking questions.
It makes the immense actual authority acceptable, even invisible, because the host constantly performs this ritual of self-deprecation. This is a dummy.
It's the ultimate intellectual Trojan horse. The power slips in under the guise of humility.
Okay, that's group 1, establishing authority. Now group 2, constructing the moral framework. These are the deceptions, tools 4 through 6, that give the audience a ready-made ideology, a clear sense of right and wrong, and crucially, an enemy to fight against.
Right. Deception number 4, monolithic they. This is pure conspiratorial thinking combined with gross oversimplification of how the world actually works.
The archetype is the cabal, right? Some shadowy, all-powerful group pulling all the strings behind the scenes.
Exactly. And the consequence. It allows the listener to trade complex, messy, often bureaucratic, or even chaotic reality for a simple, highly satisfying, almost comic book narrative. It's actually comforting in a strange way to believe that every negative event from inflation to a pandemic to a war isn't the result of complex interacting forces and human error, but is orchestrated by a single, identifiable, malicious entity.
Complexity is exhausting. A single evil cabal is easy to understand and, importantly, easy to hate.
Much easier. Then deception number 5, health as individual pursuit. This links back to the neoliberal co-option we discussed earlier. It frames health and well-being almost exclusively as a personal project.
The archetype being the Protestant work ethic, but applied to the body. Biohacking, optimization, personal responsibility above all, and heavily subsidized, let's not forget, by the massive wellness and supplement industry.
Absolutely. And the consequence here is deeply insidious. It inherently blames the individual for sickness, for stress, for lack of well-being. If you're not thriving, the implication is you failed. You failed to optimize, you didn't try hard enough, you didn't buy the right regimen, you didn't have enough discipline.
Which neatly ignores or downplays massive systemic factors. Environmental pollution, lack of access to quality food or healthcare, economic stress, workplace conditions, institutional barriers.
All swept aside. It redirects potential anger away from system failure and turns it inward into personal shame or relentless, often expensive quest for individual optimization.
And number 6 in this group, rebellion against straw man. This feels like pure virtue signaling, performing rebellion without any actual risk. The archetype is teenage rebellion, but packaged for adults.
That's a great way to put it. It's a prepackaged, curated, commercially viable form of rebellion. You get to feel like you're fighting the power, sticking it to the man.
But the man you're fighting is a caricature, a straw man version of the establishment, often constructed and demolished entirely within the safe confines of the commercial platform itself.
It poses absolutely zero threat to the actual underlying power structures or economic systems. It allows the audience to feel radical, to perform dissent without actually having to engage in difficult, risky, or potentially costly real-world activism or systemic challenge. It's rebellion as lifestyle accessory. Okay, finally, group 3, defensive mechanisms against critique. These are tools 7 through 10. These are the tactics that ensure that when the system is challenged, when critics point out flaws or misinformation, the host and the loyal audience have a ready-made defense playbook that guarantees impunity. It makes the system self-sealing.
Right, the shields go up. Number 7, slippery slope to panic. The classic slippery slope fallacy, dial up to 11. The moment any kind of regulation, policy, or even just an idea deemed establishment is suggested,
the immediate next step is automatically projected into an extreme dystopian future. Totalitarian control is always just one small step away.
The archetype is Pandora's box. If we allow this small thing, like content moderation for hate speech or a public health measure,
it will inevitably lead to that terrifying outcome, total censorship by AI overlords, mandatory re-education camps. It completely outsources rational, ethical discernment to primal fear. You don't have to engage with the merits of the actual proposal. You just have to panic about the inevitable, terrifying, slippery slope outcome.
Okay, number 8. Access as legitimacy. This is the association fallacy, but it's about the platform itself. The sheer power and reach of the platform get confused with the inherent validity or importance of the ideas presented on it.
The archetype here is kind of like the court jester's privilege, but supercharged. The platform itself becomes the kingmaker. The mere fact that controversial figures or people with debunked theories or promoters of fringe ideas are given hours and hours of airtime on this massive stage
is presented implicitly or explicitly as proof that their ideas must be legitimate or at least worthy of serious consideration. Why else would they be given this huge platform?
Exactly. The platform's reach itself becomes a validation, regardless of the actual quality, evidence, or potential harm of the content being shared. Access equals legitimacy in this equation.
And number 9, this one feels particularly potent. Preemptive victimhood. This is the persecution complex used as a shield. The archetype is almost like a secular version of Christian martyrdom.
Yes. The consequence is immediate impunity from criticism. Any critique, no matter how factually based, how carefully argued, how mild even,
is automatically framed as persecution, as an attack from the cabal or the establishment or big tech or the woke mob who are desperate to silence this brave truth teller.
So if you criticize the platform or the host, you are, ironically, just proving their point. You're proving that they are under attack, that they are dangerous to the powers that be. It creates this incredibly effective critical force field. Any incoming criticism just bounces off and reinforces the narrative.
And finally, number 10, the one that sort of enables all the others, especially the introduction of controversial or harmful ideas, just asking questions, JQing off. This is the plausible deniability playbook, the weaponized Socratic method.
This tool is absolutely essential to the whole operation. It allows the speaker, the host, to introduce incendiary claims, evidence-free speculation, outright conspiracy theories, or potentially dangerous misinformation.
While immediately being able to retreat behind the defense of, hey, I'm not saying it's true, I'm just asking the question, I'm just curious. We need to hear all sides.
Right. The consequence is the insidious poisoning of the discourse. The speaker gets to plant the seed of doubt, introduce the toxic idea into the conversation, shift the burden of proof entirely onto the critics or the audience.
Claim total neutrality, I'm just exploring ideas, and escape any and all responsibility for the potential real-world harm caused by the ideas they just promoted to millions of people. It's inquiry as a weapon. #6, structural synthesis and the ultimate deception. Okay, let's pull the lens back one last time. We've seen the individual tools. How do they fit together? Let's look at the final machine, the structural synthesis, the first 3 deceptions, the epistemic authority tools.
They establish the host and the platform as the trustworthy source. They build the foundation of belief.
Then the next 3, the moral framework tools.
They give you your ideology, your tribe, your sense of belonging, and crucially, your enemy. They tell you who you are and who you're fighting against.
And the final 4, the defensive mechanisms.
They provide the shields. They ensure that once you're inside this system, once you've bought into the authority and the ideology, you become effectively impervious to external correction or critique.
It's a meticulously constructed, self-sealing system, designed, almost perfectly it seems, to capture and contain intellectual rebellion itself.
And what's the ultimate consequence for the listener, the person caught in this matrix? The true power dynamic reveals something quite stark. The audience member, who started out believing they were reclaiming their intellectual sovereignty,
Is subtly transitioned from being a sovereign thinker, the very identity the system flatters and claims to cultivate.
into becoming primarily a consumer of anti-establishment identity.
Wow. So the intellectual rebellion itself becomes a product, a lifestyle brand you consume.
Precisely. The promised escape from the matrix, the liberation from mainstream control. It turns out to be merely your entry into a different matrix, a far more entertaining, certainly more flattering, and arguably infinitely more profitable alternative matrix. The Rogan-verse, if you will.
You believe you've walked out into the bright sunshine of truth, but you've actually just stepped inside a newer, shinier reality dome where your identity as a free thinker is the very commodity being cultivated and sold.
Which brings us right to the end, to the ultimate revelation. If we boil down all this analysis, all these mechanisms, what is the single core lie? What's the ultimate deception that sustains this entire architecture?
What is it?
The core deception is the foundational promise itself. The idea that you are thinking for yourself by listening to the specific source.
It's not just selling information or even entertainment. It's selling the feeling, the identity of intellectual sovereignty, the feeling of moral superiority, of being awake, of being part of the resistance.
It ensures the listener feels empowered, feels like a critical thinker, even as they may become deeply reliant on this single platform for their worldview, their opinions, their list of approved thoughts and disapproved enemies.
This whole architecture, then, it provides a pre-packaged set of rebellions you can adopt, a curated list of branded enemies to hate, and a commercially mediated, highly engaging path to what feels like freedom.
It tells you relentlessly to question authority, but implicitly, only the authorities it designates as illegitimate. Never, ever critically question the authority, the source, providing you with that advice. It is perhaps the most seductive form of intellectual control imaginable, precisely because it disguises itself as liberation.
Which leads us to our final cognitive directive for you, the listener. If you truly value intellectual sovereignty, it requires rigorous, metacritical analysis of all persuasive systems, especially the ones that flatter you by telling you how smart and independent you are for consuming them. Because the most seductive prison is always the one you believe is freedom.
And that's our deep dive for this week.
Remember, the most dangerous illusion is the one you don't know you're in.
But now you know. So here's our question for you. Where will you spot the cafeteria skepticism we exposed today, applying rigorous doubt only to ideas outside your tribe and your own media consumption this week?
Let us know in the comments. Question the narrative, deconstruct the dogma, see the system.
We'll see you next time. Stay skeptical.